Before Alexander carved his name across continents, before Rome's eagles cast shadows over the Mediterranean, there existed an empire so vast and influential that its echoes still resonate through the corridors of history. Stay with me, because I'll tell you what happened. This was Persia's civilization that emerged from the dusty highlands of what is now Iran to become the ancient world's first true superpower. From humble tribal beginnings to commanding an empire that stretched from the Indus River to the shores of the Aegean Sea, Persia's story is one of visionary leadership, revolutionary governance, and cultural tolerance. That was centuries ahead of its time. The Persian Empire didn't simply conquer territories, it transformed the very concept of what an empire could be. Under the guidance of extraordinary rulers like Cyrus the Great and Darius I, Persia pioneered administrative systems, infrastructure projects, and policies of religious and cultural tolerance that would influence civilizations for millennia to come. This is the story of how a collection of nomadic tribes became the architects of the ancient world's most sophisticated empire, and how their innovations in governance, communication, and cultural integration created a template that would inspire empires from Rome to the modern era. To understand the magnitude of Persia's achievement, we must first examine the world into which it emerged. The ancient Near East of the 7th and 6th centuries BCE was a complex tapestry of competing powers, each jealously guarding their territories and spheres of influence. This was not a world of unified empires, but rather a collection of city-states, kingdoms, and tribal confederations, locked in perpetual struggle for dominance and survival. In Mesopotamia, the Neo-Babylonian Empire held sway over the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Under rulers like Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon had become synonymous with wealth, architectural grandeur, and cultural sophistication. The famous Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, symbolized Babylonian power and ingenuity. Yet for all its splendor, Babylon's influence was largely regional, focused on controlling trade routes and maintaining dominance over the ancient cities of Mesopotamia. To the west, the Kingdom of Lydia controlled crucial trade routes between Asia and Europe. Under King Cyrus, whose name became synonymous with wealth, Lydia had pioneered the use of coined money and accumulated vast treasures from its control of gold-bearing rivers and strategic commercial positions. The phrase "rich as Croesus" entered common parlance, reflecting the kingdom's legendary prosperity. However, Lydia's power was built primarily on commerce rather than military might, making it vulnerable to more aggressive neighbors. In the northern regions, the Median Empire represented the most formidable military power of the era. The Medes had successfully overthrown Assyrian dominance and established themselves as the premier force in the Iranian plateau. Their capital Ecbatana was renowned for its fortifications and wealth, and their military prowess had earned them respect and fear throughout the region. The Median Empire seemed destined to be the dominant force in the ancient Near East for generations to come. Egypt, under the 26th dynasty, maintained its ancient glory along the Nile, while various Greek city-states controlled scattered territories around the Mediterranean. Each of these powers operated within their own spheres, occasionally clashing but generally maintaining a balance of power that had persisted for centuries. Into this fractured world came the Persians, initially appearing as little more than a collection of semi-nomadic tribes inhabiting the rugged highlands of Fars, in what is now southern Iran. The region of Persia proper was considered a backwater, far removed from the centers of civilization and power. The Persians were vassals of the Medes, paying tribute and providing military service when required. Few observers of the time would have predicted that this seemingly insignificant tribal confederation would soon reshape the entire ancient world. The Persian homeland was harsh and unforgiving, characterized by mountains, deserts, and limited agricultural potential. This environment had forged a hardy people, skilled in warfare and accustomed to hardship. Unlike the settled populations of Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Persians retained much of their nomadic heritage, including exceptional horsemanship and mobility. These qualities, which might have seemed primitive to the sophisticated urbanites of Babylon or Lydia, would prove to be decisive advantages in the conflicts to come. From this unlikely setting emerged one of history's most remarkable figures, known to posterity as Cyrus the Great. Born around 600 BC, Cyrus was destined to transform not only the Persian tribes, but the entire structure of the ancient world. His story begins with the stuff of legend, involving prophecies, attempted infanticide, and a dramatic rise from obscurity to supreme power. According to the historian Herodotus, Cyrus's grandfather, determined to prevent this fate, Astyages ordered the infant Cyrus to be killed. However, the nobleman entrusted with this grim task could not bring himself to murder the child, and instead gave him to a shepherd to raise in secret. This tale, whether historically accurate or mythological, established Cyrus as a figure of destiny from his earliest years, growing up among common people rather than in the luxury of a royal court, proved to be formative for Cyrus. He learned the values and concerns of ordinary citizens, developed practical skills, and gained an understanding of leadership that was grounded in real-world experience rather than theoretical knowledge. This background would later inform his remarkably enlightened approach to governance and his ability to connect with diverse populations throughout his empire. When Cyrus eventually revealed his true identity and claimed his rightful place among the Persian nobility, he brought with him a vision that extended far beyond the traditional boundaries of tribal leadership. Rather than simply seeking to improve Persia's position within the existing order, Cyrus envisioned a complete transformation of how power was exercised and empires were governed. The first test of Cyrus's revolutionary approach came with his rebellion against his grandfather, Astyages, and the Median Empire. This was not merely a family dispute, but a fundamental challenge to the established order. The Medes were the dominant power in the region, with a professional army and established administrative systems. For the Persians to challenge them seemed almost suicidal. However, Cyrus possessed advantages that were not immediately apparent to his enemies. His years among common people had taught him the importance of winning hearts and minds, not just battles. Rather than relying solely on force, Cyrus employed diplomacy, propaganda, and strategic alliances to weaken Median resistance. He presented himself not as a conqueror but as a liberator, promising better treatment for those who joined his cause. The decisive moment came around 550 BCE, when Cyrus's forces met the Median army in battle. In a stunning upset, the Persian forces not only defeated their former overlords, but did so with such completeness that the Median Empire effectively ceased to exist as an independent entity. This victory was remarkable, not only for its military significance, but for how Cyrus handled the aftermath. Rather than destroying Median cities or enslaving their populations, Cyrus incorporated the Medes into his growing empire, often retaining their leaders in positions of authority and respecting their customs and traditions. This pattern of conquest, followed by integration, became the hallmark of Cyrus's imperial strategy. Unlike previous conquerors, who sought to impose their own culture and systems on defeated peoples, Cyrus recognized that lasting empire required the willing cooperation of diverse populations. He developed what might be called the first systematic approach to multicultural governance, creating administrative structures that could accommodate different languages, religions, and customs within a unified political framework. The conquest of Media was only the beginning. With his eastern flank secured, Cyrus turned his attention to the wealthy kingdom of Lydia and its legendary king. The Lydian campaign demonstrated Cyrus's growing sophistication as both a military commander and a political strategist. Croesus, confident in his wealth and military preparations, had consulted the oracle at Delphi before deciding to attack Persia. The oracle's famously ambiguous response that if Croesus went to war, he would destroy a great empire was interpreted by the Lydian king as a promise of victory. He failed to consider that the great empire destroyed might be his own. The siege of Sardis, Lydia's capital, showcased Persian military innovation and adaptability. When conventional assault tactics proved insufficient, Cyrus's forces discovered a weakness in the city's supposedly impregnable fortifications and exploited it. With characteristic Persian ingenuity, the fall of Sardis in 546 BCE brought enormous wealth into Persian coffers and established Cyrus as a major player in the politics of the Eastern Mediterranean. More importantly, the treatment of Croesus after his defeat further demonstrated Cyrus's revolutionary approach to conquest. Rather than executing the defeated king or subjecting him to public humiliation, Cyrus treated Croesus with respect and eventually made him an advisor. This magnanimity was not merely personal kindness, but calculated policy, designed to encourage other rulers to surrender rather than fight to the death. The conquest of Babylon represented the culmination of Cyrus's military and diplomatic genius. Babylon was not only the wealthiest city in the world, but also a symbol of ancient civilization and power. Its massive walls and sophisticated defenses had protected it from numerous previous attacks. However, Cyrus understood that Babylon's greatest strength, its diverse population and complex religious and cultural traditions, could also be turned into a weakness if properly exploited. Rather than attempting a costly siege, Cyrus employed a combination of military pressure and political subversion. He presented himself to the Babylonian people not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator sent by their own god Marduk to free them from the oppressive rule of the last Neo-Babylonian king. This message resonated with many Babylonians, who had indeed grown dissatisfied with Nabonidus's religious innovations and neglect of traditional ceremonies. When Persian forces finally entered Babylon in 539 BCE, they did so not as conquerors storming a defeated city, but almost as invited guests. The transition of power was so smooth that normal commercial and religious activities continued without interruption. This bloodless conquest of the ancient world's greatest city established Cyrus as a leader of unprecedented skill and vision. The policies Cyrus implemented in Babylon became the template for Persian imperial administration throughout the empire. Rather than imposing Persian religious practices, he restored traditional Babylonian ceremonies and rebuilt neglected temples. He maintained existing administrative structures while integrating them into the broader Persian system. Most famously, he issued what became known as the Cyrus Cylinder, often called the First Charter of Human Rights, which proclaimed his commitment to religious freedom and the restoration of displaced peoples to their homelands.
This last policy had profound historical consequences, particularly for the Jewish people who had been held in Babylonian captivity since the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. 2. Cyrus's decree allowing the Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple was seen by many as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. The Hebrew Bible refers to Cyrus as a Messiah anointed, one the only non-Jewish ruler to receive this designation. This act of liberation created a lasting bond between the Persian Empire and Jewish communities that would persist for centuries. By the time of his death around 530 BC, Cyrus had created an empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, encompassing virtually all of the civilized world known to his contemporaries. More importantly, he had established principles of governance that would influence imperial administration for millennia to come. His combination of military prowess, diplomatic skill, and administrative innovation created a new model for how diverse peoples could be united under a single political authority while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. The death of Cyrus the Great in 530 BCE marked the end of an era, but the Persian Empire he had created was far from complete. The task of consolidation and further expansion fell to his son Cambyses, who inherited not only a vast empire but also the enormous challenge of maintaining and extending his father's achievements. Cambyses's reign would prove to be both a continuation of Persian expansion and a period of internal instability that would test the empire's fundamental structures. Cambyses too ascended to the throne with clear advantages. He inherited the most powerful military machine in the ancient world, a sophisticated administrative system, and the loyalty of diverse populations who had benefited from Persian rule. However, he also faced the enormous challenge of living up to his father's legendary reputation, while dealing with the practical problems of governing an empire. Spanned 3 continents, the new king's most significant achievement was the conquest of Egypt, the last major independent power in the ancient Near East. Egypt under the 26th dynasty had maintained its independence and cultural distinctiveness for over a century, successfully resisting various foreign invasions through a combination of natural defenses, military skill, and diplomatic maneuvering. The conquest of Egypt would complete Persian dominance over the entire civilized world and provide access to the enormous wealth of the Nile Valley. The Egyptian campaign, launched in 525 BCE, demonstrated both the continued effectiveness of Persian military organization and Cambyses's own capabilities as a commander. The decisive battle at Pelusium saw Persian forces overcome Egyptian defenses through a combination of superior tactics and innovative siege techniques. The fall of Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital, effectively ended organized Egyptian resistance and brought the land of the pharaohs under Persian control. However, Cambyses's treatment of conquered Egypt revealed significant differences from his father's approach. While Cyrus had consistently shown respect for local customs and religious practices, Cambyses, according to some ancient sources, he showed disrespect for Egyptian religious traditions and may have killed the sacred Apis bull, an act that would have been seen as sacrilegious by the Egyptian population. These policies, whether accurately reported or exaggerated by later hostile sources, suggest that Cambyses lacked his father's intuitive understanding of how to manage diverse populations. Where Cyrus had succeeded through a combination of strength and magnanimity, Cambyses relied more heavily on force and intimidation. This approach, while effective in the short term, created resentments that would later contribute to rebellions and instability. The problems with Cambyses's reign extended beyond his policies in Egypt to include serious issues within the Persian heartland itself. While the king was campaigning in Africa, rumors began to circulate about succession disputes and internal conspiracies. The most serious of these involved a figure known as the false Smerdis or Gomara, who claimed to be Cambyses's brother Badia and attempted to seize the throne. The exact details of this succession crisis remain unclear, complicated by conflicting ancient sources and the propaganda of later rulers who sought to justify their own claims to power. What is certain is that while Cambyses was extending Persian power into Africa, the stability of the empire's core territories was being undermined by internal conflicts and competing claims to legitimacy. The crisis deepened when Cambyses died under mysterious circumstances in 522 BCE while rushing back from Egypt to deal with a rebellion. Some sources suggest he died from an infected wound, while others hint at suicide or assassination. Regardless of the exact cause, his death left the Persian Empire in a state of unprecedented uncertainty. With multiple claimants to the throne and no clear mechanism for resolving the succession dispute, the reign of the false Smerd, whether he was actually Cambyses's brother or an impostor as later Persian sources claimed, lasted only a few months but had significant consequences for the empire's development. His policies, which included tax reductions and the recall of military forces from frontier regions, suggest either a genuine attempt at reform or a desperate bid to win popular support against more legitimate claimants. The succession crisis that followed Cambyses's death revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the imperial system Cyrus had created. On one hand, the empire's administrative structures and military organization proved resilient, enough to survive a period of disputed leadership without complete collapse. Provincial governors continued to maintain order, trade continued to flow, and the basic functions of government persisted despite the uncertainty at the center. On the other hand, the crisis demonstrated that the Persian Empire remained heavily dependent on the personal authority and charisma of its rulers. Unlike later imperial systems that developed more institutionalized forms of succession and governance, the Persian Empire of this period was still essentially a personal monarchy held together by the loyalty of key nobles and the military effectiveness of the royal army. The resolution of this crisis would require a leader of exceptional skill and ruthlessness, someone capable of both seizing power and legitimizing his rule in the eyes of diverse populations throughout the empire. That leader would emerge in the person of Darius, whose rise to power would mark the beginning of a new phase in Persian imperial development and the creation of administrative systems that would influence governance for centuries to come. From the chaos and uncertainty that followed Darius, known to posterity as Darius the Great, his rise to power in 522 BCE marked not only the resolution of the Persian succession crisis, but also the beginning of a new phase in imperial development that would see the creation of administrative, architectural, and cultural achievements that would define Persian civilization for centuries to come. Darius was not a direct heir to the throne. He belonged to a collateral branch of the Achaemenid royal family and had served as a spear-bearer to Cambyses during the Egyptian campaign. His claim to the throne was based on genealogy, merit, and ultimately, his ability to seize and hold power through a combination of military skill, political acumen, and administrative genius. The circumstances of his rise would later be commemorated in the famous Behistun inscription, a trilingual monument that served both as historical record and propaganda document. The consolidation of Darius's power required more than a year of continuous military campaigning against various rebels and pretenders throughout the empire. This period, which Darius himself described as involving 19 battles against 9 rebel kings, tested every aspect of Persian military and administrative capabilities. The successful suppression of these revolts demonstrated not only Darius's personal leadership abilities but also the fundamental strength of the imperial system that Cyrus had created. However, Darius understood that military victory alone was insufficient to ensure long-term stability. The rebellions had revealed serious weaknesses in the empire's administrative structure, particularly the lack of systematic oversight of provincial governors and the absence of reliable communication systems between the center and the periphery. Addressing these problems would require comprehensive reforms that would transform the Persian Empire from a collection of conquered territories into a truly integrated administrative system. The cornerstone of Darius's administrative reforms was the creation of the satrap system, a sophisticated form of provincial government that balanced central control with local autonomy. The empire was divided into 20 cities, each governed by a satrap who was typically a member of the Persian nobility or a trusted local leader. These satraps were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and providing military forces when required, but they were also expected to respect local customs and traditions. To prevent the satraps from becoming too independent, Darius created an elaborate system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors, known as the eyes and ears of the king, traveled throughout the empire to monitor provincial administration and report directly to the royal court. Military commanders in each province were appointed separately from the civil governors, preventing any single individual from accumulating too much power. Additionally, the royal treasury maintained detailed records of tax collection and expenditure, allowing the central government to detect any irregularities or signs of rebellion. The efficiency of this administrative system was greatly enhanced by Darius's investment in infrastructure, particularly the creation of the royal road system. The main royal road stretched over 1,600 miles from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in the Persian heartland, with relay stations every 15 miles providing fresh horses and supplies for royal messengers. This system allowed communications that previously took months to be completed in a matter of days, revolutionizing the speed and effectiveness of imperium administration. The royal road was more than just a communication system. It was a symbol of Persian power and a practical tool for economic integration. Merchants could travel safely across vast distances under royal protection, facilitating trade and cultural exchange throughout the empire. The standardization of weight measures and currency that Darius implemented further encouraged commercial activity and helped create a truly imperial economy. Darius's economic policies reflected his understanding that a lasting empire required not just political control but economic prosperity. The introduction of a standardized gold currency that facilitated trade and provided a stable medium of exchange throughout the empire. Tax collection was systematized and made more predictable, reducing the arbitrary exactions that had characterized earlier periods. The result was an unprecedented period of economic growth and prosperity that benefited both the imperial treasury and ordinary citizens throughout the empire. The architectural achievements of Darius's reign provided lasting symbols of Persian power and sophistication. The construction of Persepolis, begun around 515 BC, created one of the ancient world's most magnificent ceremonial complexes. Unlike previous royal capitals that served primarily as administrative centers, Persepolis was designed specifically to showcase the diversity and grandeur of the Persian Empire. Its elaborate reliefs depicted representatives from all corners of the empire bringing tribute to the king, creating a visual representation of Persian universal dominion.
The architectural style developed at Persepolis synthesized influences from throughout the empire, incorporating Egyptian columns, Mesopotamian decorative motifs, and Greek sculptural techniques into a distinctively Persian aesthetic. This cultural synthesis reflected the broader Persian approach to imperial governance, which sought to incorporate the best elements of conquered civilizations rather than simply imposing Persian customs on subject peoples. Darius's building projects extended far beyond Persepolis to include infrastructure improvements throughout the empire. Roads, bridges, and irrigation systems were constructed or improved, contributing to economic development and administrative efficiency. The construction of a canal connecting the Nile River to the Red Sea, an ancient predecessor to the Suez Canal, demonstrated Persian engineering capabilities and facilitated trade between the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean regions. The religious policies of Darius continued and refined the tolerant approach pioneered by Cyrus. While personally devoted to Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of Zoroaster, Darius consistently supported the religious practices of his diverse subjects. He provided funding for the reconstruction of temples throughout the empire, including the completion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, and maintained the traditional ceremonies and festivals of conquered peoples. This religious tolerance was not merely a matter of personal conviction, but a calculated policy designed to maintain stability and loyalty throughout the empire. By respecting local religious traditions, Darius ensured that conquered peoples had a stake in the continued success of Persian rule. The alternative, forced conversion or religious persecution, would have created constant sources of rebellion and instability. The military innovations of Darius's reign reflected his understanding that the empire's continued expansion. Security required constant adaptation and improvement. The Persian army was reorganized to incorporate the best military techniques from throughout the empire, creating a truly international force that combined Persian cavalry, Greek hoplites, Egyptian engineers, and specialized troops from dozens of other regions. However, Darius's military ambitions also led to the empire's first major setback, the failed invasion of Greece. The Persian Wars, beginning with the Ionian Revolt in 499 BCE and culminating in the defeats at Marathon and later demonstrated the limits of Persian power and marked the beginning of a new phase in the relationship between East and West. The Greek campaigns, while ultimately unsuccessful, revealed both the strengths and limitations of the Persian imperial system. The empire's ability to mobilize enormous resources and coordinate complex military operations across vast distances was unprecedented in the ancient world. However, the Persian approach to warfare, which relied heavily on overwhelming numerical superiority and the intimidation of enemies, proved less effective against the disciplined citizen soldiers of the Greek city. Despite these military setbacks, Darius's reign must be judged as one of the most successful in ancient history. By the time of his death in 486 BCE, he had created administrative, economic, and cultural systems that would sustain the Persian Empire for more than 2 centuries. His innovations in governance, infrastructure, and imperial organization influenced every subsequent empire from Rome to the Islamic Caliphates to the modern Nican state system. The Persian Empire, created by Cyrus and perfected by Darius, represented far more than just another ancient conquest state. It established principles and practices of governance that would influence political development for millennia to come, creating the first truly multicultural empire and pioneering administrative techniques that remain relevant to modern states. The Persian approach to imperial governance was revolutionary in its recognition that lasting empire required the willing cooperation of diverse populations rather than simple military domination. This insight led to the development of administrative systems that balanced central control with local autonomy, allowing subject peoples to maintain their cultural identities while participating in a larger imperial framework. The satrap system, with its careful division of civil and military authority and its elaborate oversight mechanisms, provided a template for provincial administration that would be adopted and adapted by subsequent empires throughout history. The Persian emphasis on infrastructure development as a tool of imperial integration was equally innovative. The Royal Road System and other transportation networks created by Persian engineers facilitated not only administrative communication, but also commercial exchange and cultural interaction on an unprecedented scale. These infrastructure investments generated economic growth that benefited both the imperial treasury and ordinary citizens, creating a positive feedback loop that strengthened imperial loyalty and stability. The Persian model of religious and cultural tolerance was perhaps their most significant contribution to the development of civilization. By respecting the customs and beliefs of conquered peoples, the Persians created a form of empire that was genuinely multicultural rather than simply. This approach not only reduced the likelihood of rebellion, but also allowed the empire to benefit from the diverse talents and knowledge of its subjects. The Persian court became a center of learning and cultural exchange, where scholars, artists, and administrators from throughout the known world could contribute to imperial development. The economic innovations of the Persian Empire, particularly the standardization of currency, weights, and measures, created the world's first truly international economy. Persian gold coins became the standard medium of exchange from India to Greece, facilitating trade and investment on a scale previously unimaginable. The predictable tax system and protection of commercial routes encouraged entrepreneurship and economic development throughout the empire. The architectural and artistic achievements of the Persian Empire, exemplified by the magnificent complex at Persia, demonstrated how imperial power could be expressed through cultural synthesis rather than cultural domination. Persian art and architecture incorporated influences from throughout the empire, creating a distinctive aesthetic that celebrated diversity while maintaining unity. This approach to imperial culture would influence artistic development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The Persian legal and administrative traditions, preserved in cuneiform archives and later transmitted through various channels, influenced the development of law and governance in subsequent civilizations. The concept of written law codes, systematic and bureaucratic administration that characterized Persian government became standard features of imperial administration throughout the ancient world. Even the Persian military innovations had lasting influence. The concept of a professional army incorporating diverse ethnic groups and military traditions became a standard feature of imperial forces. The Persian emphasis on logistics, communication, and coordination in military operations established principles that remain relevant to modern military science. The Persian Empire's influence extended far beyond its political and military achievements to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of civilization itself. By demonstrating that diverse peoples could coexist peacefully under a single political authority, while maintaining their distinct cultural identities, the Persians provided a model for multicultural society that remains relevant to contemporary debates about integration, a national identity. The Persian approach to leadership, exemplified by rulers like Cyrus and Darius, emphasized the importance of legitimacy based on competence and service, rather than simply hereditary right or military conquest. The Persian concept of kingship as a sacred trust, requiring the ruler to serve the welfare of all subjects, regardless of their ethnic or religious background, influenced political thought throughout the ancient world and contributed to the development of more sophisticated theories of political authority. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in the 4th century BC, he found an administrative and cultural system so sophisticated that he largely adopted it, rather than replacing it with Macedonian institutions. The Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from Alexander's conquests continued to use Persian administrative techniques, and many Persian cultural and artistic traditions persisted throughout the Mediterranean world. The Roman Empire, which eventually succeeded the Hellenistic kingdoms as the dominant power in the ancient world, incorporated many Persian innovations into its own administrative system. The Roman provincial system, with its careful balance of central control and local autonomy, clearly reflected Persian influence. Roman infrastructure projects, from roads to aqueducts, followed Persian models of using public works to integrate diverse territories into a unified empire. The influence of Persian governance extended beyond the classical world to shape the development of Islamic civilization. the Abbasid Caliphate in particular, adopted many Persian administrative practices and cultural traditions, creating a synthesis of Islamic religious authority and Persian governmental expertise that would influence Middle Eastern politics for centuries. Even in the modern era, the Persian model of multicultural empire continues to provide insights relevant to contemporary challenges. The European Union, with its attempt to balance national sovereignty with supranational integration, faces many of the same challenges that confronted Persian administrators 2.5 millennia. The Persian experience suggests that successful integration of diverse populations requires not just economic incentives and administrative efficiency, but also respect for cultural differences and genuine commitment to inclusive governance. The story of Persia's rise from a collection of tribal confederations to the world's first superpower demonstrates the transformative power of visionary leadership, innovative administration, and cultural tolerance. The achievements of Cyrus, Darius, and their successors created a template for imperial governance that influenced political development throughout the ancient world and continues to provide insights relevant to contemporary challenges of diversity, integration, and global governance. In our modern world of increasing interconnection and cultural diversity, the Persian example reminds us that lasting political success requires not just military and economic power, but also the wisdom to respect and incorporate the contributions of all members of society. The Persian Empire's greatest achievement was not its military conquests or architectural monuments, but its demonstration that diverse peoples could work together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. This lesson, learned in the highlands of ancient Iran over 2 millennia ago, remains as relevant today as it was in the time of Cyrus the Great. So what can we learn from Persia? That power isn't just taken by force, it's built through vision. From Cyrus' mercy to Darius' brilliance, they forged an empire that lasted generations. If you found wisdom in their rise, give this story a voice. Like, share, and subscribe, because I'll tell you what happened.